Now we're going to have a bigger discussion about what really is the point of Apstra and talk broadly about how it does what it does. Ultimately, Apstra is all about intent-based networking, and that is something that I mentioned in one of the previous videos. What does this mean? It means you are not focused on the individual configs on your network devices. Instead, you declare the network's purpose, the network's intent. Basically, if you have customer A, you're going to say customer A is going to have, 3 subnets and they should all be able to talk to each other. And that's it. That's where it lives. You can say he'll have subnet 1, 2, and 3. They're going to deploy virtual machines on that subnet whenever they feel like it. And whenever those VMs migrate, they're supposed to talk to each other. But really, you just leave it at this broad discussion, this broad topic of what is the purpose of my network. The purpose of my network is to support customer A using something like VXLAN. I haven't talked about typing commands yet. I haven't talked about deploying a fabric, what underlay to use, what overlay to use, how will they communicate, what ASN to use, what VNIs to use. I haven't talked about that. All I've said is that my intent for this network is to do this one thing. And what Apstra then does is it takes your intent and it logs in to all of the devices in its inventory and it types the commands or issues the commands, so to speak, quote unquote, using really, netconf in this day and age. But it uses network automation to configure all of these devices to perform the way that we intend for the network to perform. It abstracts the need for you to really know these configuration commands and on which devices it was really configured on. This can feel like a very fuzzy topic to a seasoned network engineer until you've really seen it in action, because it is a true mindset shift. As an architect, you spend your time in the weeds, in the nitty-gritty, planning out which VLANs, which VNIs, and how they map together, and how they're going to configure this device to talk to that device, and so on and so on. You spend all your time thinking about that, but now you don't. Now you focus on the customer. The customer is really where your focus is in on now, or, the revenue-generating application or whatever it is. You focus on the app, the thing, and then you let Apstra handle the nitty-gritty details. So there's really 4 phases that make this all work. The first phase is, I got to get my pen back here, clear the screen. The first phase is the design phase. And this is one of the cases where if I look over here on the left-hand side, I actually have a design button. And when we think about design buttons, we see weird things like rack types and interface maps and logical devices. But what really happens here is where we say, what kind of topology are we going to use? Probably spine leaf. We're not going to use something like a collapse core or a collapse spine or anything like that. We'll just use spine leaf in this case. We'll say, what kind of routing methodology are we going to use? Are we just going to have layer 3 everywhere? Or are we going to do something like use EVPN to establish routes throughout the topology? We'll talk about our pools. This is going to be things like we'll have an IP address pool to pick from. We'll have a VNI pool to pick from. We'll have an ASN pool to pick from. Notice I'm not saying we're going to have to use this ASN for this use case on this device. We're going to let Apstra do that for us. It just needs a pool of ASNs to pull from. And to help it out, it'll want to know the number of spines as well as the number of leaves. So this is kind of the idea with the design phase. We're really starting to define our intent for this network. We intend for it to be in spine leaf layout. We intend to use EVPN and ultimately VXLAN. We intend to have this kind of address space and this number of devices. Now, the question that we move on to next is we move on to the build section. I want to pause for a second and say with design and build, it's important to know that no configurations will change on your devices. No configurations get pushed out to the devices just yet. We're just designing, and in the build phase, we basically say what devices to use. So let me just put up here, with one design, we answer the question, what do you want to do? And the build phase, we answer ... with what devices. This is where we start to specify our physical switches. What interfaces are going to be used to connect to which devices, which other switches. What is the device role? Is it a spine? Is it a leaf? Or is it something more than that? And kind of going hand in hand with interfaces, I'm going to put and links right here. Devices, the physical switches themselves, what interfaces they are, what the links are to other switches, and what is the role of this particular device. Again, we've answered a lot of design questions here. We haven't pushed any configurations. Once we have those things figured out, that's when we move into deploy. And this is where the configurations get pushed out into the environment, and our switches, which are really doing nothing right now, all of a sudden become a full-fledged data center fabric. Step 4 is validate. This is simply monitor. Make sure it's working. Troubleshoot things that aren't working. And if you actually look at the JNCIS exam right here, it does say you start out with the design phase, then you move into the build and deploy phase. There's not much here with the actual validate, except for intent-based analytics. That's kind of one of the things they want you to use here, is when we look at the concepts, applications, and benefits of intent-based analytics, that's your validate section here. Now, I'll say this right now to introduce this concept. You'll see in the exam blueprint this thing called blueprints. Well, blueprints are a way to track your designs. So ultimately, when we put a full design and build together, it's going to be known as a blueprint right here. Once a design has been finalized, you deploy the blueprint to push the design into production. Basically, we'll attach devices to the blueprint, and it'll automatically push the configuration out from there too. The cool thing about blueprints, and the thing you probably want to remember for the exam, is they are versioned. So as you change them, it will track what changes from one blueprint to the next, and you can revert back to older versions if things don't go according to plan. So now that we kind of have an idea for the workflow of Apstra and AOS, we'll talk a little bit more details about how it gets done.